The fluorescent lights hummed above her as she packed her things into a cardboard box. The office that once felt like a place of purpose now reeked of betrayal. Her co-workers avoided her eyes. Management had made it clear she wasn't welcome anymore. She had spoken up. She had raised the alarm. And for that, she was fired. But what nobody realized that day was this. Months later, the very same woman they tried to silence would be called a hero. Her name was Danielle Pierce. By all accounts, Danielle wasn't a troublemaker. She was a mid-level analyst at a government contractor, smart, quiet, the type who kept her head down and did her job. She believed in rules, in systems, in the idea that the truth mattered. But in late 2019, Danielle noticed something strange in the reports she handled. Data didn't match. Numbers had been altered. Shipments of medical equipment, supposed to be bound for rural hospitals, were being rerouted. At first, she thought it was just clerical error. But the deeper she dug, the more it looked intentional. Billions of dollars in taxpayer money were disappearing into a maze of shell companies. On paper, supplies were delivered. In reality, some hospitals never received a single box. And when Danielle asked questions, she was told one thing: drop it. What Danielle uncovered was a classic corruption scheme, one that preyed on the weakest. Federal contracts were being siphoned off. A handful of executives were pocketing millions while patients in understaffed hospitals suffered without basic supplies. She brought her concerns to her supervisor. Instead of listening, he slammed the folder shut and leaned in. "You don't understand how things work here. If you know what's good for you, you'll forget what you saw." Danielle didn't forget. She went higher up. Emails, calls, meetings. But each time, the response grew colder. She was told she was misinterpreting the data, that she was confused. Then the retaliation began. First, she was cut out of meetings. Then came sudden bad performance reviews. And finally, the dismissal. Officially, she was let go for poor teamwork. But everyone knew why. The message was clear: stay quiet. Danielle left the building that day with her box of belongings and a heart full of dread. Outside, the city streets buzzed with the usual rhythm of car horns and footsteps. But to her, every sound was sharp, menacing, as if the world itself was warning her to back off. She had lost her job. Her savings were dwindling, and her reputation was being quietly destroyed. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking herself the same question over and over: was it worth it? But Danielle couldn't let it go. She gathered documents, copies of contracts, altered spreadsheets, email chains. Evidence that told a damning story. And she reached out to journalists. In early 2020, one reporter finally listened. His name was Marcus Reed, an investigative journalist known for digging into corporate scandals. When Marcus met Danielle in a quiet coffee shop, he noticed her trembling hands as she slid over a USB drive. She was nervous, looking over her shoulder every few minutes. The clink of spoons, the hiss of the espresso machine, it all seemed too loud, too exposed. On that drive were hundreds of files. Enough to suggest something massive. Marcus and his team began combing through the data. Patterns emerged. Fake vendors. Inflated invoices. Supplies marked delivered that never reached their destinations. And then came the smoking gun. Internal emails, executives joking about our little side hustle. What Danielle had stumbled onto wasn't just negligence. It was organized theft, stretching into the tens of millions of dollars. But as Marcus prepared his story, strange things began happening to Danielle. Her apartment door was left ajar when she was certain she had locked it. A dark sedan idled outside her building at odd hours. One night, her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging. Last warning." Fear clawed at her chest. She considered backing out. But then came the breaking point. Marcus revealed to her that while hospitals were short on supplies, patients, children included, had died waiting for treatments that never arrived. The theft wasn't just money. It had a body count. And Danielle knew she couldn't stay silent. By summer 2020, the story broke. Headlines screamed across the nation: millions stolen in hospital supply scam. Executives were indicted. Federal investigators launched raids. And behind the scenes, whispers of the anonymous whistleblower spread. When Danielle's name eventually surfaced, the public's reaction was immediate. The same woman who had been branded a problem employee was now seen as a truth-teller. News outlets called her the hero who spoke up. Lawmakers praised her courage. Online, people demanded protections for her and accountability for those who retaliated. For a moment, Danielle felt vindicated. But her relief wouldn't last. Because while the executives faced trial, Danielle's life spiraled further. She remained unemployed. Former colleagues avoided her calls. Companies that once recruited her now saw her as a liability. Even as she was called a hero on television, in her personal life she was isolated. She moved apartments, kept her curtains drawn, and flinched at every unfamiliar sound outside her door. And then another twist. Evidence suggested the corruption ring was bigger than anyone thought. The executives under indictment were only the middlemen. Somewhere above them, political figures, shadow networks, people with far more to lose were pulling strings. And those people were still free. One late night, as Danielle returned from the grocery store, she noticed a man leaning against the brick wall near her building. His face was half hidden under a baseball cap. He didn't move as she passed. But when she reached her door, her phone buzzed with a new message. "You should have stayed quiet." The screen went dark. Danielle froze, her keys trembling in her hand. Because for all the headlines, for all the praise, the fight was far from over. The question now wasn't whether justice would be served. It was whether Danielle Pierce would survive long enough to see it. This is just the beginning of Danielle's story. And as the investigation digs deeper into the powerful figures behind the fraud, the stakes rise higher. But one chilling question remains. When the truth threatens those at the very top, how far will they go to silence it? The first story made headlines. Executives were arrested. Danielle Pierce was called a hero. But behind the applause and praise, a darker storm was brewing. Because the people she helped expose were not the ones truly in charge. And now, the net was tightening, not around the criminals, but around her. For a brief moment, Danielle allowed herself to breathe. Her story had shaken the nation. She had done what no one else dared to do, tell the truth. But the glow of victory faded quickly. Her name was all over the news. Some praised her. Others accused her of being a liar, a disgruntled employee out for revenge. Online forums exploded with debate. And as her face spread across television screens, so did the risks. She wasn't anonymous anymore. At night, her phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers. "You should have stayed in your lane. We know where you live." She reported them to the police. But without proof, the officers shrugged it off as harassment. Then one morning, she found her car tires slashed. Days later, her mailbox stuffed with shredded papers. The same documents she had leaked to journalists. Someone wanted her to know they were watching. The fear was suffocating. Every knock on the door, every creak of the floorboards at night made her heart race. Still, Danielle refused to run. She told Marcus, the journalist, "If I back down now, they win." As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a chilling fact. The executives already arrested weren't masterminds. They were pawns. The fraud ring extended far beyond the company. Into lobbyists, into political offices. People with influence, people who could bury an investigation with a single phone call. One FBI agent assigned to the case confided privately to Marcus. "This goes way higher than we're allowed to touch." The implication was clear. The people Danielle had exposed might never face real justice. And she had just painted a target on her back. In late October, Danielle noticed she was being followed. The same dark sedan trailed her through traffic, parked across from her building. One evening, as she carried groceries inside, she heard footsteps behind her in the stairwell. Heavy, deliberate. When she spun around, no one was there. But waiting at her door was an envelope. Inside, a single photo of her walking down the street, circled in red marker. No note, no demands, just a warning. She was no longer just a whistleblower. She was prey. Meanwhile, Marcus uncovered something explosive, documents tying the fraud directly to a high-ranking government official. A man who appeared on television smiling beside the president, championing transparency, while pocketing millions behind the scenes. If Marcus went public with this, it would shake the nation to its core. But the risk to Danielle would multiply tenfold. The night he showed her the files, Danielle's face went pale. She whispered, "If this gets out, they'll come for both of us." 2 weeks later, Danielle's worst fears came true. She was driving home when headlights suddenly flared in her rearview mirror. A black SUV roared up behind her, swerving dangerously close. Her heart pounded. She tried to turn off onto a side street, but the SUV followed, its engine growling louder. Then it rammed her from behind. Her car lurched forward, tires screeching. She fought the wheel, swerving desperately as the SUV struck again. Her groceries spilled across the passenger seat, glass bottles shattering, the smell of milk and fruit filling the car. Finally, she veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. When she looked back, the SUV was gone. She survived. But the message was clear: next time, she might not. Shaken and bruised, Danielle called Marcus. He told her to pack a bag and leave town immediately. But when she returned to her apartment that night to gather her things, the door was already open. Her lights were on. The curtains swayed as if someone had just moved inside. On her kitchen table lay a single object, her USB drive of evidence, which she had locked away days earlier in a private safe. Someone had been inside. Danielle froze, her breath catching in her throat. And then, her phone buzzed with a new message. "This is your final warning." The screen went black. Danielle Pierce thought exposing the fraud was the hard part. But the real battle has only begun. Because the deeper she goes, the more dangerous the truth becomes. By now, Danielle Pierce had lost her job, her peace, and almost her life. The SUV attack proved one thing: someone wanted her silenced. But when she stepped back into her apartment that night and found her evidence tampered with, Danielle realized the threat wasn't just outside. It was inside her home. Danielle barely slept. Every sound felt magnified: the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of pipes, the faint shuffle of footsteps from neighbors above. But her mind was fixed on one thought: they had been here. The USB drive, her lifeline, her proof, had been moved. Whoever broke in hadn't stolen it. They wanted her to know they could reach her at any time. When Marcus arrived the next morning, he urged her to go into hiding. But Danielle shook her head. "If I run, they win. If I disappear, no one will care what happens next." Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. The FBI, once eager, suddenly grew quiet. Leads went cold. Search warrants were delayed. Phone calls unanswered. It was as if someone had pulled invisible strings to shut the case down. Marcus confided in her one night, his voice low. "Danielle, I think they have people inside the investigation." The realization was crushing. The very system meant to protect her might already be compromised. Then came the first sighting. Danielle noticed a man at her bus stop. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray coat despite the warm weather. He stood motionless, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The next day, he was there again. Not close, not threatening, just present. Soon, Danielle began seeing him everywhere. Across the street when she bought groceries, outside the coffee shop where she met Marcus, leaning against a lamppost near her apartment. He never spoke. He never approached. But his silence was louder than any threat. Meanwhile, Marcus's team pieced together more damning evidence. Payments traced offshore. Meetings held in private clubs. Names of politicians whispered in encrypted messages. The corruption wasn't a side hustle, it was a network. A machine built on lies, bribes, and blood. And the deeper Marcus dug, the more Danielle's life unraveled. Friends stopped returning her calls. Former co-workers avoided her on the street. She was alone. But Marcus had one plan left: release the next round of documents. Go public. Force the story into the light before it could be buried. Late one night, Marcus arranged to meet Danielle in a deserted parking lot. He said he had something urgent, something too risky to send electronically. Danielle arrived, her heart hammering in her chest. The lot was dark, the air thick with the smell of gasoline from nearby trucks. Marcus approached her car, his face pale, his hands shaking. He handed her an envelope. Inside were photographs. Politicians, business leaders, even a law enforcement officer, all smiling at a private dinner. The same dinner Danielle's stolen medical supplies had paid for. And then, footsteps echoed. Both of them turned. The man in the gray coat was there, standing at the edge of the lot. Before Danielle could react, Marcus whispered urgently, "They know. We don't have much time." And then, tires screeched. Another black SUV tore into the lot, headlights blinding. Marcus shoved Danielle toward her car. "Go!" he yelled. But she froze, torn between fight and flight. The SUV door flung open. A man stepped out, his face hidden in shadow. And then Danielle realized it wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a message. They were ready to end it. Marcus pulled her arm, dragging her behind a concrete pillar as the SUV roared closer. The man in the gray coat raised a hand, gesturing, signaling. The SUV braked hard, skidding to a stop only feet away. Danielle's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A new message appeared, chilling her to the bone. "Part 3 ends tonight. Unless you stop." She looked up, only to see Marcus staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. And then, before she could ask, before she could move, Marcus whispered, "Danielle, I think they've gotten to me too." The line between ally and enemy has blurred. The conspiracy has grown darker. Danielle Pierce thought the worst was behind her, until Marcus whispered the words she never expected to hear. "Danielle, I think they've gotten to me too." In that moment, the only person she thought she could trust became her greatest fear. And now, the line between ally and enemy was gone. The SUV's engine growled in the night. Its headlights cut through the darkness, throwing long, sharp shadows across the cracked asphalt. Danielle's pulse pounded in her ears. She gripped Marcus's arm, trying to drag him toward her car. But Marcus hesitated. His face was pale, his breath uneven, like a man torn between guilt and survival. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he whispered. "They offered me a deal." Danielle's heart dropped. Her only ally might have sold her out. The SUV door creaked open again. A second man stepped out, carrying a phone. He raised it, and Danielle's phone buzzed instantly. "Come with us quietly, or Marcus takes the fall." Her blood ran cold. Danielle's instincts took over. She shoved Marcus aside and sprinted toward her car. The night air stung her lungs as shouts rang out behind her. Tires screeched, footsteps thundered, and somewhere in the chaos, Marcus yelled her name. She fumbled with her keys, hands trembling, before the engine finally roared to life. She slammed the accelerator, the smell of burnt rubber filling the air as she tore out of the lot. In her rearview mirror, she saw the SUV whip around, headlights blinding as it gave chase. But Danielle knew the city better. She cut through side streets, weaving past midnight traffic, until finally, silence. The SUV was gone. For now. Back in her apartment, Danielle collapsed onto the floor, her chest heaving. The envelope Marcus had given her lay on the table, the photos of politicians and businessmen at their secret dinner. She stared at them, her hands shaking. These were the people who had stolen millions. The people whose greed had left hospitals empty and patients dead. And now she understood why the threats kept coming. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a system. A machine fueled by money and protected by power. And Marcus? Whether willingly or under pressure, he was now a part of it. The next evening, Marcus showed up at her apartment. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He pleaded with her through the door. "Danielle, I didn't betray you. They threatened my family. You don't understand, I had no choice." Danielle's hands tightened around the lock. She wanted to believe him, but every instinct screamed danger. Finally, she cracked the door just enough to speak. "If you're with them, I'm already dead. If you're with me, then prove it." Marcus slid a flash drive under the door. "This is everything I didn't give them. Names, dates, bank accounts. If I was really against you, I wouldn't risk this." His voice broke. "But Danielle, once you open it, there's no turning back." That night, Danielle plugged the drive into her laptop. Lines of data filled the screen: offshore accounts, coded transactions, private jet manifests. And then, her stomach dropped. One of the names was a shock. A senator who had been leading public calls to protect whistleblowers. The man who had praised Danielle on live TV was also on the payroll of the fraud ring. It was bigger and darker than she ever imagined. Before she could process the betrayal, the lights in her apartment flickered. Then, darkness. Her laptop screen snapped off. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The entire building went silent. And then, from outside, the low rumble of an engine. Danielle's breath caught in her throat. Someone had cut the power. A shadow moved past her window. Then another. They weren't waiting anymore. They were coming in. Danielle grabbed the flash drive and backed into the hallway, her hands trembling. The sound of glass shattering echoed from the kitchen window. Heavy footsteps crunched across broken glass. Voices whispered in the dark. Her phone buzzed one last time. You should have run when you had the chance. The screen went black. And as Danielle clutched the flash drive to her chest, she realized with chilling certainty, this wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about survival. The whistleblower had become the hunted. The apartment was dark. Glass crunched under heavy boots. Shadows slipped through the broken window. Danielle Pierce clutched the flash drive to her chest, knowing it was the only proof left. But tonight, it might also be the reason she didn't live to see morning. Her pulse pounded as she pressed against the hallway wall, straining to listen. Two voices murmured inside. Low, controlled, professional. These weren't petty thugs. They were trained. One of them spoke with chilling calm. She's here. Don't make a mess. Orders were clear. Danielle's throat tightened. Orders? From who? She slid silently toward her bedroom, every creak of the floor threatening to give her away. Her mind raced. Run, hide, fight? But before she could decide, the beam of a flashlight sliced across the hallway. Got her! The shout split the silence. Danielle bolted, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor. She crashed into her bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. The door rattled instantly, kicked, shoved, struck. Open it, Danielle. Don't make this harder. Her breath came in sharp bursts. She glanced at the window for stories up. Escape was suicide. Staying was death. She spotted her old lamp on the nightstand. The cord trailed to the wall. A plan sparked. She yanked the cord, the metal lamp heavy in her grip. When the door burst open, she swung with every ounce of fear and fury. A groan. One man dropped, clutching his head, but the other lunged, grabbing her wrist. The lamp clattered to the floor. His grip was iron, his breath hot against her ear. You should have kept quiet. Before he could drag her down, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. Enough! The man froze. Danielle looked past him, and her blood ran cold. Standing in her living room doorway was a figure she recognized instantly. The senator. The same man who had praised her bravery on television. The same man who had called her a national hero. Now, his face was twisted in a cold smile. You really thought you could win, Danielle? The senator stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching over glass. Do you know how many lives depend on this system? How many people profit? You thought you were uncovering corruption. But what you really did was threaten the foundation that keeps this country running. Danielle's stomach churned. He wasn't just complicit, he was orchestrating it. The fraud, the bribes, the cover-ups, it all led back to him. You wanted the truth? Here it is. The world doesn't survive on honesty. It survives on control. And people like me make sure it stays that way. His words dripped with venom, his calm more terrifying than the thug's violence. Danielle tried to speak, but the man holding her tightened his grip. The senator leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Hand over the drive. Walk away. Maybe you live. Refuse, and you vanish. Her heart pounded. She thought of the hospitals, the patients, the children who had died because of stolen supplies. If she gave up now, their deaths would mean nothing. But before she could answer, another sound split the night. A gunshot. The thug holding her staggered, then collapsed. Danielle's eyes darted up. In the shattered window, silhouetted by moonlight, was Marcus. He aimed the gun at the senator, his face shadowed, unreadable. "Danielle, run." For a split second, hope flared. Marcus had come back. Maybe he hadn't betrayed her after all. But then, the senator didn't flinch. He smirked. "Go ahead, Marcus. Pull the trigger. Or should I remind you who owns your life?" Danielle's stomach dropped. Marcus was tied to him. Somehow, Marcus's hands shook. The gun wavered between Danielle and the senator. "But I can't." The senator's smile widened. Suddenly, footsteps thundered in the hallway. More men. Reinforcements. Danielle's options vanished. She was trapped between Marcus, her only ally, but maybe her betrayer, and the senator, the puppet master pulling every string. The senator leaned in, his voice calm, chilling. "This ends tonight. One way or another." The men closed in. Marcus's finger trembled on the trigger. And Danielle realized she had only seconds to decide who to trust. In the silence before the storm, one truth became clear. The real danger wasn't just the corruption. It was choosing the wrong ally. The room was chaos. The senator stood smugly in the doorway, his men closing in. Marcus trembled with a gun in his hand, caught between fear and loyalty. And Danielle Pierce, clutching the flash drive that could bring everything crashing down, had seconds to decide who to trust. This was the moment her entire fight had been leading to. "Marcus!" Danielle shouted, her voice cracking. "If you're with me, prove it, right now." His hands shook violently. The senator's voice cut through the tension, low and poisonous. "Do it, Marcus. Hand her over. She's nothing." Danielle's heart pounded. The flash drive burned in her palm, heavy with names, accounts, and proof of every crime. Marcus lowered the gun toward her. Danielle's breath caught, until, in one sudden motion, he spun and fired. The shot echoed like thunder. One of the senator's men dropped instantly. "Run, Danielle!" Marcus yelled. Bullets ripped through the air. Shards of drywall and glass rained down. Danielle dove behind the couch as Marcus fired again, buying her seconds. The senator cursed, ordering his men to close in. Danielle knew she couldn't fight her way out. But she could do something worse, something they feared. She pulled her phone from her pocket, hands trembling, and plugged in the flash drive. The files opened. Bank accounts. Invoices. Evidence that could destroy them all. With one deep breath, she hit send, blasting the documents to every journalist, lawmaker, and watchdog contact she had. Her heart raced as the progress bar filled. 20%, 40%, 80%, and then 100%. It was gone. Out of her hands. Irreversible. The senator's face drained of color as he realized what she'd done. "You don't know what you've started," he hissed. Danielle stood, her voice steady for the first time in months. "No, you don't. The truth is out, and you can't bury it anymore." Sirens wailed in the distance, dozens of them. Blue and red lights began flooding the street below. Marcus lowered his gun, chest heaving as the senator's men exchanged panicked glances. Within minutes, federal agents swarmed the building. The senator was dragged out in handcuffs, his shouts of denial drowned by flashing cameras and reporters' questions. The machine had finally cracked. Weeks later, Danielle stood before a Senate committee. She wasn't just a whistleblower anymore. She was a symbol. Her testimony shook the nation. Laws were passed. Protections for whistleblowers were strengthened. Hospitals began receiving supplies again. Lives saved instead of stolen. But it came at a price. Danielle had lost her job, her privacy, and nearly her life. When asked why she never stopped, her voice was quiet, but firm. Because silence kills. And truth, no matter the cost, is the only thing that saves. Danielle Pierce's fight ended with justice, but her story is a chilling reminder of how far corruption will go to silence the truth. She was fired, threatened, hunted, but in the end, she became something more. A hero. And now, I want to leave you with a question. If you discovered the truth, would you risk everything to expose it? This has been another story on Dark Justice Files. If you found it gripping, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video so more people hear stories that others would rather keep hidden. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We shine a light where others want darkness. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop seeking the truth.